My name is Isabel, and I'm 37 years old. 4 days ago, my mother rang me for the first time in 9 months, not to ask how I was getting on, not to inquire about the grandchildren she'd never once troubled herself to visit. She rang to tell me I needed to sell my husband's land, £2.5 million, in a fortnight, to save the family from financial ruin. The same family that hadn't invited me to Christmas dinner because my husband wouldn't fit in at the table. The same mother who told my sister's children that Auntie Isabel had married beneath herself. The same sister whose self-proclaimed genius of a husband once called Marcus a glorified mud shoveler to his face at a dinner party he hadn't even wanted to attend. And now they needed us. Before I tell you what happened at my mother's 65th birthday dinner, what was uncovered, and the choice I made, please take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy this story. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Let me take you back to where this all truly began. 9 years ago, I was the daughter my mother introduced at every garden party, like a trophy she'd polished herself. Durham graduate, junior analyst at a boutique investment firm in the City of London. The sort of career that made Patricia Weston's eyes shine when she mentioned it to her friends over white wine and canapes. My Isabel, she'd say, tilting her glass just so. She's going places. She'll be running her own fund within a decade, mark my words. And I believed her. I believed that particular trajectory was mine. The corner office in Canary Wharf, the sharp suits, a husband with the right surname and the right postcode, Kensington perhaps, or Notting Hill at the very least. Then I met Marcus at a farmer's market in the Yorkshire Dales. I'd driven up for a long weekend to clear my head. Burnout had been gnawing at me for months, the kind that settles deep in your chest and makes even breathing feel like an effort. And I'd needed air that didn't carry the tang of ambition and underground exhaust. He was standing behind a trestle table, heaped with heritage tomatoes and dried herbs, wearing a faded barbour jacket with the collar turned up against the October chill, boots caked with pale limestone mud. He wasn't handsome in the polished, groomed way I was accustomed to. But when he talked about soil pH and the science of crop rotation, his eyes lit up with a quality I had never once encountered in any boardroom or conference call. A kind of pure, uncomplicated passion. For something real, I came back the following weekend. And the one after that. By December, I already knew. When I finally brought him home to meet my family at our mother's townhouse in Harrogate, she took one long, deliberate look at his calloused hands and asked the question that would quietly define the next 9 years of our life together. "So, Marcus," she said, her smile as thin as tracing paper, "what is it you actually do? For a living, I mean." He didn't flinch. He didn't shift uncomfortably or make apologies. He simply smiled and said, "This is what I do, Mrs. Weston. I grow food." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. My sister, Georgina, leaned over to her husband, Richard, and whispered something behind her hand. They both laughed, quietly enough to seem polite, loudly enough to be heard. I pretended not to notice, but I noticed every single thing, and that was only the beginning. Our engagement party was supposed to be a celebration. My mother insisted on hosting it herself at her house, a sprawling, detached Edwardian property in Harrogate that she'd spent 2 decades decorating to impress people she barely tolerated. 30 guests, Prosecco, vol events, the full performance. Marcus wore his best shirt. I could tell he'd ironed it himself. The collar was fractionally uneven, and I loved him more for it than I'd ever loved anyone for anything perfect. Richard and Georgina arrived 25 minutes late, pulling up in a brand new Range Rover Sport, and Richard made certain everybody noticed it. "Nice motor," someone commented near the door. "Just a small reward," Richard said, loud enough to carry across 2 rooms. "Made senior partner at the fund last quarter." When he shook Marcus's hand, his eyes dropped to my fiancé's shoes. Clean, but worn. Practical. Smart boots, Richard said. Do they come with the tractor, or is that extra? A few people laughed. Marcus just smiled, unhurried and entirely unbothered. They do, actually. It's all part of the package. Then came my mother's toast. She stood at the head of the sitting room, glass raised, and I made the mistake of hoping. Just briefly. Just enough to hurt. To Isabel and Marcus, she began. My younger daughter has always done things her own way. She's headstrong, independent. A pause, theatrical, practiced. I only hope that in a few years' time she won't look back and feel she's given away everything she worked for. She gestured vaguely at Marcus, at us, at the life she couldn't bring herself to understand. I looked at my father. Gerald Weston sat in the armchair in the corner, studying his whiskey like it contained answers, saying absolutely nothing. He'd spent a lifetime saying nothing. But my grandmother, Gran Frances, reached beneath the table and squeezed my hand. Her grip was firm and warm. I like him, she whispered. He's the real thing. That night, lying awake in my old bedroom, I made a decision. I would leave London. I would build a life with Marcus, and I would stop waiting for my family to see what I could see so clearly. I just didn't know it would take 9 years for them to come crawling back. The North Yorkshire countryside welcomed us, like somewhere you'd always meant to return to. We bought 180 acres of rolling farmland just outside Skipton, at the edge of the Dales. The farmhouse was a proper fixer-upper, rattling sash windows, a kitchen that had last been touched in the mid-80s, and a stone porch that groaned in the wind as though confiding something. But it was ours, every cold, imperfect inch of it. Marcus threw himself into the work from the very first morning, dawn until dusk, sometimes beyond. He built raised beds and polytunnels, installed irrigation systems, negotiated contracts with suppliers, drove to auctions at 5 a.m. without complaint. I learned alongside him how to read soil, when to plant, what a particular change in the weather meant for the season ahead. Within 3 years, our organic produce was supplying 4 farmers' markets across the Dales and into West Yorkshire. Within 5, we held contracts with 2 Michelin-starred restaurants in Harrogate and a premium food delivery service based in Leeds, and then came Freya. Our daughter arrived on a raw February morning, furious from the first breath, with opinions already fully formed. 18 months later, Sam followed, quieter, watchful, with Marcus's steady way of observing everything before speaking. I had never been happier, not even close, but there was something I hadn't spoken about. Something Marcus had asked me, quietly and without drama, to keep between us. His work had never stopped at farming. During our first winter, while I thought he was reading agricultural journals beside the wood burner in the evenings, he had actually been finalising patents, running calculations on his laptop with the screen angled slightly away, taking calls with investors he'd known from what he called the other chapter. A chapter that predated the Barber jacket and the limestone mud. A chapter from his time at Imperial College London, where he'd completed a doctorate in agricultural engineering. His thesis on precision farming systems had attracted considerable interest from venture capital firms the year he graduated. He'd walked away from every offer until eventually he didn't. He built the company quietly over 3 winters, with no announcements and no press releases. Just steady, methodical progress. Real solutions. Clients who valued results over pitch decks and TED Talk aesthetics. They don't deserve to know, he told me once, meaning my family, and I stopped needing their respect a long time ago. I never argued. But I always wondered, in the quieter parts of the night, what would happen if they ever found out. The call came just after 11:30 on a Wednesday evening. I was sitting on the edge of Sam's bed, one hand resting on his back, as he finally drifted off after a bad dream about something he couldn't describe. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I saw my sister's name. A name that hadn't lit up my screen in 9 months, Georgina. She was crying. Not the careful, managed tears I remembered from our childhood, the kind she deployed when she wanted something from Dad. These were different, ugly, ragged sobs with no performance in them at all. Isabel. Her voice cracked down the line. I need your help. We're in trouble. Real trouble. I stepped out into the hallway, pulling Sam's door gently to behind me. What sort of trouble? Richard made some terrible investments. He's lost everything. The house, the cars, our savings. It's all gone. It's just gone. I stood very still in the dark corridor, processing. How much? 2.5 million. We need £2.5 million within a fortnight, or Mum loses her house too. She put the Harrogate property up as collateral for Richard's trading positions. My stomach dropped clean through the floor. She did what? She believed in him. Georgina's voice turned briefly defensive, then collapsed again. We all did. And now you want me to do what exactly? Sell some land. It's just fields, Isabel. You've got nearly 200 acres. Sell a parcel of it. Help us, please. I heard Marcus's footsteps behind me. He'd woken. He was standing in the bedroom doorway in the dark, watching with that particular quiet concern that had always made me feel steadier than I deserved to feel. I need some time to think, I said. Time? Georgina's desperation curdled fast, the way it always had. We don't have time. This is the family, Isabel. You owe us. Family. The word sat in my mouth like something foreign. I'll ring you in the morning. I ended the call before she could respond. But as I stood in the hallway in the dark, her voice continued running through my head. Specifically, one fragment that made no sense to me. Something half said, frantic, almost swallowed. Richard said your husband's company was supposed to fail. It was supposed to fail. What did that mean? I couldn't sleep. After Marcus went back to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop, the cold glow of the screen harsh against the darkness. I typed Richard's name into Google, pairing it with hedge fund and investment. The results took a moment to load, then I saw it. Caldwell Capital. Senior partner Richard Caldwell dismissed following internal compliance review. The article was 7 months old. It described Richard's departure from the fund as by mutual agreement, the corporate language for being quietly pushed out the door. No specifics given. But reading between the lines required very little effort. Something had gone badly wrong. I kept searching. A financial commentary forum mentioned his name in a thread about aggressive short-selling positions. Someone had posted. Anyone else tracking Caldwell's bet against that AgroSense startup went absolutely all in. Either genius or catastrophic. No middle ground with this one. AgroSense. My hands went cold. I picked up my phone and scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in nearly a year. Priya Mehta, an old colleague from my city days who now worked in regulatory compliance at a firm in Moorgate. She picked up on the third ring, her voice foggy with sleep. Isabel, it's midnight. I know, I'm sorry. I need a favour. This had better be worth it. Richard Caldwell. Do you know him? A pause. Then a dry, short laugh. Everyone in the industry knows Richard Caldwell. Knew him, rather. He's something of a cautionary tale now. What do you need? What happened? Massive short position. He bet against a sustainable farming technology company. Bet his entire personal net worth that they'd go under. Their stock went up over 320%. He was completely wiped out. Priya yawned quietly. Whoever runs that company must be sleeping very well indeed. Caldwell bet the lot on them failing. Rather poetic when you think about it. I stared at the far wall of the kitchen. Whoever runs that company, Isabel. You've gone very quiet. Thank you, Priya. I owe you. You owe me a proper lunch. Come to London soon. Good night. I set the phone down and walked slowly back through the house to the bedroom. Marcus was awake, propped against the headboard, watching me in the dim light that came through the curtains. "You've found out," he said. It wasn't a question. I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone warm in my hand. "How long have you known?" He rubbed his face, exhaled slowly. In the pale light through the curtains he looked tired. Not guilty, not triumphant, just tired and a little sad. "About 9 months." 9 months. I let that settle. "And you didn't tell me. I didn't want to hurt you." He reached for my hand, and I let him take it. The quarterly shareholder reports showed unusual short activity concentrated in one position. I had our CFO run a trace. Richard's name came up. "He bet against your company." "Our company," Marcus corrected, gently. And yes, he did. I thought about every year of sneering remarks. The way Richard had always looked at Marcus, the way you look at something that doesn't belong on your carpet. The mud shoveler comment that still tightened my jaw when it surfaced in my memory. "He wanted you to fail. He needed me to fail." Marcus's voice stayed level, but underneath it I heard something like iron. "He hated that you chose me over whatever version of the future he thought was appropriate for you. Someone like him, probably. Cut from the same cloth. It wasn't enough to look down on you. He wanted to profit from your destruction. What was I supposed to do?" Marcus asked, his voice quiet. "Ring him up and gloat? Warn him he was about to lose everything?" He shook his head slightly. "The best answer to someone like Richard Caldwell is to keep building. Let them manage their own destruction." I thought about Georgina's desperate call, about my mother's house. "They're asking us to sell our land to cover losses he made betting against you. I know, losses he made specifically trying to destroy us. I know." My phone buzzed on the duvet. A text from my mother. "Patricia Weston, 10 minutes past midnight. We need to speak. Come to my birthday dinner. It's important. Everything is arranged." I showed it to Marcus. He read it, then looked at me in the quiet way he had. "Do you want to go?" I did. But not for the reasons my mother was expecting. The following morning, while Marcus took the children down to feed the chickens and check the polytunnels, I found myself searching again. This time I typed Marcus's company name directly, AgroSense Technologies. A piece from a business magazine appeared near the top of the results, published 4 months previously. The Imperial College doctorate who walked away from Silicon Valley to reinvent sustainable farming. I clicked through, and there was Marcus, not in his barbour this time, but in a simple dark green jumper, standing inside a greenhouse lined with sensor arrays and monitoring equipment. The photograph credit listed a studio in Bristol. He'd driven down for it, and never mentioned it once. The article detailed his path from Imperial. Doctorate at 27. Offers from major technology firms he'd turned down in sequence. Years of quiet development on precision agriculture systems that reduced waste and increased yield without chemical dependency. And then this, AgroSense Technologies, now valued at approximately £38 million, has fundamentally disrupted conventional farming metrics by integrating AI-driven soil analysis with sustainable land management. Founder Marcus Fenwick remains deliberately private, content to let outcomes speak in his stead. £38 million. My husband. The man my mother believed couldn't provide for me. The man Richard Caldwell had called a glorified mud shoveler. He had built something worth £38 million while wearing muddy boots and driving the same Land Rover he'd had when we first met, while raising our children and tending our land, and never once needing to prove anything to a single person. I saved the article to my phone, not to brandish it, not to wave in anyone's face, but because I had a strong feeling that the truth was about to need a very specific shape. "You found it," Marcus said from the doorway. Freya on his hip and Sam trailing behind, with one welly boot inexplicably missing. I looked up. Why didn't you ever tell them? He shrugged, settling Freya more comfortably against his side. Because it wouldn't have changed anything. They'd simply find new reasons to think less of us. He wasn't bitter when he said it, just honest. They were never looking at the thing that actually mattered. He was probably right, but I wasn't entirely sure that was still enough of a reason. Pryor rang back that afternoon. "I've found something," she said, her voice different from the night before, sharper, more careful. "You're not going to like it. Tell me anyway." She'd forwarded a screenshot, an image of a private group chat between traders, leaked during the compliance proceedings that preceded Richard's termination. The message was time-stamped 9 months earlier, and it carried his name. I read it 3 times, standing at the kitchen window with the fells visible beyond the polytunnels. My brother-in-law's little farming venture is about to collapse. Got solid information from a contact inside the operation. The technology doesn't hold up at scale. I'm going all in on the short. This is going to make me a fortune. The expression on Isabel's face when they go under will honestly be worth more than the money. The expression on Isabel's face. He hadn't merely wanted Marcus to fail. He had wanted to watch me suffer. To see me standing in the rubble of the choice I'd made. To prove, once and for all, and in front of everyone, that I'd been wrong. And he'd used my mother's retirement savings, the money she'd set aside over decades, to do it. I saved the screenshot to a password-protected folder. Then I rang my mother. She picked up immediately, as though she'd been holding the phone. "Isabel." "Good. You're coming." "Yes. Wonderful." Her voice softened, just enough to sound almost warm. "We have a great deal to discuss. The solicitor has already drawn up the paperwork. It's all quite straightforward. All you'd need to do is sign." "What paperwork?" "For the land transfer. Richard has handled all the administrative side. It's very simple." I almost laughed out loud at the kitchen ceiling. Richard has handled everything. "I'll be there on Saturday," I said. "Marcus too." A brief pause. "Is that strictly necessary?" "Yes, Mum, it is." She exhaled, that particular sigh of hers, the one I'd been hearing since childhood, the one that managed to communicate disappointment, resignation, and mild affront in a single breath. "Very well. But please, Isabel, don't make this into something difficult. We're family." I said nothing to that, and ended the call. Saturday. My mother's 65th birthday dinner. 40 guests, a contract she expected me to sign in front of all of them. They were going to use the room itself as a trap, the social pressure, the eyes, the sense of occasion. They had absolutely no idea what was coming through the door with me. The restaurant was precisely the kind of place my mother would select. A converted Georgian townhouse in Harrogate's town centre, all exposed stonework and crystal chandeliers, white linen on every table, and a pianist playing quietly in the corner. The kind of establishment where people came specifically to be witnessed being comfortable. We arrived 5 minutes before 7. Marcus wore a plain white shirt, no tie. I'd chosen a deep blue dress, fitted but not fussy. We looked like exactly what we were. People with nothing whatsoever to prove. My mother met us at the entrance. "You came." Her smile was calibrated precisely, warm enough for the room, eyes doing something more complex. She air-kissed near my cheek, without contact. "Both of you." A glance at Marcus, brief and sideways. "Come. Everyone's inside." Everyone was 40 guests arranged across a private dining room. I recognised some of my mother's Harrogate set. Women who'd spent 3 decades appraising each other's husbands and handbags with the dedication of a second profession. A scattering of Richard's former city colleagues, looking various degrees of uncomfortable. Distant cousins I hadn't seen in years, and in the corner, at a small table with a clear view of the entire room, Gran Francis. She caught my eye the moment we came in and raised one hand in a small, deliberate wave. But her expression wasn't festive. It was watchful. "Worried?" in that particular way of hers that I'd always trusted more than other people's confidence. Georgina was already seated near the head of the long table, her face blotchy in a way that careful concealer hadn't quite managed to fix. Richard sat beside her, jaw set hard, staring at his phone with the expression of a man who blamed it for everything. "Isabel." Georgina stood, her voice pitched several notes too bright. "So glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it." My father appeared from somewhere near the bar, a whiskey already in hand. Gerald Weston. He looked at me, then at Marcus, and shook Marcus's hand. Properly, voluntarily, for the first time in 9 years of knowing him. "Good to see you both." His voice was rough at the edges. Really, something in the room felt held back, suspended. A collective breath nobody was quite taking. I looked at Marcus. He'd felt it too. "Let's find our seats," I said quietly. The main course had been cleared, and the plates taken away when my mother rose from her chair. If I could have everyone's attention for a moment. A waiter moved around the room, tapping crystal, and the conversation settled. Patricia Weston stood at the head of the table, champagne flute in hand, in the cream-coloured dress she'd bought specifically for this evening. "Thank you all so much for coming tonight to mark my 65th. Her voice carried easily, warm and practiced. 65 years. I honestly can't quite believe it. Polite laughter rippled around the table. Someone called across the room that she didn't look a day past 50. She accepted it with the grace of someone who'd expected it, then her expression changed. Just fractionally. The way a stage light changes when the scene shifts. But tonight, I also want to speak about family. About what it truly means to come together when the people you love need you. She turned, and her gaze found mine across the room. My younger daughter has made a life for herself in the countryside. A modest, quiet life, but apparently quite a comfortable one. Modest, quiet. Every word wrapped in silk and loaded underneath. And right now, she continued, our family is in need of her help. A waiter appeared from behind a partition, carrying a slim leather folder with the unmistakable look of legal documentation. He walked the length of the room and placed it directly in front of my seat. I didn't reach for it. "It's a simple matter," my mother said, her voice filling the room now, the tone of someone who had rehearsed this carefully. "A parcel of land, signed over to cover an immediate obligation, just her signature, and this is resolved tonight." 40 pairs of eyes turned toward me. I could feel them, the expectation, the curiosity, the quiet certainty that I would do what was asked of me, because that was what you did in front of 40 witnesses at your mother's birthday dinner. Richard stood up and smoothed his jacket. He'd always had excellent tailoring. It's a fair market valuation, completely above board. Your husband's land isn't exactly prime real estate. We've been generous, frankly. Your husband's land, not our land, not our children's home and future. Your husband's land. My mother's smile tightened at the corners. "Go on, Isabel. This is what family does. You won't let your mother lose her home. Not really. The trap had been sprung. Now it was time to spring my own." The whispers started almost immediately. A woman 2 seats to my left, one of my mother's book group, I thought, leaned toward her neighbour and murmured something that carried just far enough. "Poor Patricia. Imagine having to ask your own daughter in front of everyone." Another voice from somewhere behind me. "She's always been the difficult one, even at school, apparently." Georgina leaned forward. "Isabel has always put herself first. She left us to play at being a farmer's wife, while the rest of us stayed and dealt with everything here. Some people get to opt out, I suppose. Must be nice." I felt Marcus's hand find mine beneath the table. Steady. Warm. An anchor I didn't need, but was glad for. Richard circled the space near my chair now, enjoying the theatre of it. Performing for an audience. Let's be straight about this. Your husband got fortunate with some fields and a bit of dirt. The decent thing, the family thing, is to share what you have, That's how it works. The decent thing, I repeated quietly. That's exactly right. He was fully in his stride now. I mean, what has the man actually contributed? He grows vegetables. He packs boxes. Frankly, my grandmother did something similar with her allotment, and nobody gave her a spread in country life. A few uncertain laughs. My father stared at the tablecloth with the focused intensity of a man trying to disappear inside it. My mother pressed forward. So, Isabel, will you sign? She gestured at the leather folder. Or will you prove to everyone here that your family never actually meant very much to you at all? The room held its breath, the 40 people waiting for me to fold, to be the sensible one, the reasonable one, to sacrifice what Marcus and I had built, quietly, stubbornly, entirely on our own terms, so that they could maintain their particular version of the world a little while longer. 5 seconds of silence became 10. Then I stood. But I didn't reach for the pen. Before I give you my answer, I said, my voice perfectly level, I have a question for Richard. His smile faltered, only slightly, only for a moment. What sort of question? Quite a simple one, actually. I looked directly at him. Can you explain to everyone here exactly how you lost all your money? Right. Quick pause. I know this is building to something. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to know, what would you do if you were in my position? Would you sign the paperwork to keep the peace, or would you stand your ground? Drop your answer in the comments. Type sign or stand. I want to know. And if you're still here with me, please do hit subscribe. Now, back to that restaurant. Richard's expression went hard as stone. That's not remotely relevant to the matter at hand. I completely disagree. I kept my voice pleasant, conversational even. You're asking me to give away £2.5 million worth of land. I think everyone in this room deserves to understand exactly how the original money disappeared. My mother stepped forward. Isabel, this really isn't the time or place. When is the right time, Mum? I turned to her. After I've already signed? When it's too late to ask any questions? The room shifted. I saw Gran Francis lean forward in her seat, her eyes sharp and entirely alert. Around the table, several guests had set down their glasses. Richard, I said, returning to him. You were dismissed from Caldwell Capital 7 months ago, weren't you? His jaw tightened. I left of my own volition. That's not quite what the financial trade press reported. Compliance review. Termination by mutual agreement. I let the phrase sit in the air for a moment. But that isn't even the most significant part, is it? Georgina's hand went to her collar. Isabel, stop this. You didn't merely lose your employment. You took my mother's retirement savings, money she'd set aside over 30 years, and you invested it yourself, through your own accounts, without telling her what the actual strategy was. I looked at my mother. Is that right? He was managing the money on your behalf? Victoria's champagne glass trembled slightly in her hand. He was trying to help the family. Was he? I said. Or was he gambling with your future using someone else's stake? The room had gone entirely quiet. Even the pianist had stopped. Everyone could feel it. The specific atmospheric pressure of something irrevocable approaching. Richard moved closer, dropping his voice to something that was meant to sound controlled, but didn't quite manage it. You haven't the first idea what you're talking about. Actually, I spent the past 4 days learning exactly what happened to your position, Richard, in considerable detail. Would you like to explain it to the room? Or shall I? He said nothing. His colour had changed. I continued. Richard made what traders call a short position, I said, lifting my gaze to include the room. That means he borrowed shares in a company and sold them, betting that the company's value would collapse. If it did, he'd buy the shares back cheaply, return them, and pocket the difference. A substantial profit, if you're right. I paused. He was not right. This is completely inappropriate, Richard said. This is a birthday dinner, not... He specifically targeted a sustainable farming technology company, I said, based on what he described as solid information from a contact inside the business. He committed everything to this position. His own savings, his bonus from the previous financial year, and the retirement fund my mother had entrusted to him. My mother was very still. I picked up my phone, opened the screenshot Priya had sent, and read it aloud into the silence of the room. My brother-in-law's little farming venture is about to collapse. Got solid information from a contact inside the operation. The technology doesn't hold up at scale. I'm going all in on the short. This is going to make me a fortune. I paused deliberately. The expression on Isabel's face when they go under will honestly be worth more than the money. The silence that followed was absolute. I lowered the phone. Richard didn't make a poor investment. He specifically and deliberately targeted my husband's company. He bet everything, including my mother's retirement savings, on Marcus failing. Not because he had sound financial intelligence, because he wanted to watch me lose. My mother's voice came out very small. Derek, Richard, is this true? He couldn't hold her eye. The information I received was credible. The position was rational. It should have worked, I finished for him, except it didn't. Because the company didn't fail, Richard. I looked at him steadily. It grew, 320% in the past 18 months. His legs appeared to lose some of their certainty beneath him. You lost everything, I said, betting against a company that is now valued at £38 million. The murmur that moved through the room was different from the whispers before. This was shock, real shock. Someone near the front said it aloud, half to themselves. 38 million. As though hearing it spoken might make it make sense. An older man to my left, one of Richard's former colleagues from the fund, raised his hand slightly. Which company are we actually talking about here? I opened the magazine article on my phone and passed it to the woman beside me. Pass this round, please. The phone moved from hand to hand. I watched faces change as it travelled, confusion giving way to something like disbelief, disbelief giving way to something that looked, on several faces, remarkably like awe. Someone near the middle of the table read aloud, the Imperial College doctoral graduate who left the city behind to reinvent sustainable agriculture, AgriSense Technologies, founder Marcus Fenwick. The name hit the room like something dropped from a height. Richard pushed through the guests nearest him and grabbed the phone. His hands weren't steady. He stared at the screen, at the photograph of Marcus in his dark green jumper, in front of the greenhouse, calm and completely unconcerned with being seen. That's. His voice had gone hoarse. He plants things. He drives a 20-year-old Land Rover. Marcus had been entirely silent throughout, sitting beside me, unhurried, watching everything with that steadiness of his that had always seemed to unsettle exactly the people who most needed unsettling. Now he stood. The room contracted slightly. I am a farmer, he said. His voice was quiet and carried without effort. I'm also an engineer. I hold a doctorate from Imperial College, London. A pause, precise and calm. The two things are not mutually exclusive. They never were. You could have heard a moth land. My mother's champagne glass slipped from her fingers. It hit the flagstone floor and shattered. Nobody moved to clear it. From her corner table, Gran Francis's voice rang out, thin but triumphant, with the particular satisfaction of a woman who has been proved right and is not remotely shy about it. I said it the very first time I met him. Smartest person in any room he walks into, and the only one who doesn't need anyone else to know it. She was smiling now, her eyes bright and alive. Nobody in the room had anything to say to that. Then the room erupted, whispers becoming exclamations, guests pulling out their own phones, several conversations starting simultaneously. Someone called across the table, asking someone else if they'd seen the valuation figure. Richard stood where he was, the phone still in his hand, watching his entire carefully constructed narrative dismantle itself in real time. 38 million, the mud shoveler. 38 million pounds. The chaos settled gradually, like sediment after disturbed water. Guests found their seats again, or tried to, but everything had shifted. The way a room shifts after something is said that cannot be unsaid. They weren't looking at me with the patient pity of people watching someone make an eccentric choice anymore. They were looking at my mother. Patricia Weston stood where she'd been standing, the broken glass glittering at her feet, mascara beginning to make its way down her face. Isabel. Her voice had lost everything. Whatever Richard has done, we're still family, surely. Whatever's happened, you have the means, you could help. I stood and I kept my voice gentle, deliberately, carefully gentle, because what I was about to say wasn't cruelty, it was just the truth. I'm not signing anything, Mum, but you have the resources. You could. This land isn't mine to sell. I picked up the leather folder she'd had her solicitor prepare and set it aside without opening it. It's Marcus's work. It's our children's future. It's our home. I don't have the right to give that away. Not for this. Georgina lifted her face, eyes raw. So you're going to let Mum lose everything? You're going to punish the whole family? For 9 years, I said, you told me I'd made a mistake. I looked around the room, not performing, just speaking. You didn't invite me to Christmas. You told Freya and Sam's cousins that their mother had chosen a lesser life. You cut me out of family photographs because Marcus didn't fit the image. I looked at my mother. You used my engagement party to announce to 30 people that you pitied my choices. Patricia flinched. And now you're asking me to sell my children's inheritance to cover losses from a bet made specifically against us. I let the rat room sit with that. Think about what you're actually asking. We didn't know, my mother whispered. I didn't know what Richard was doing. Not specifically. Maybe not the details. But you gave him your retirement savings without asking questions, because you believed in the image he projected. The car, the fund, the postcode. I held her gaze. You never believed in us. Not once. Not for a single moment. The words landed with the weight of 9 years behind them. I watched my mother's expression shift through several things she didn't have words for. Having resources doesn't mean I owe them to people who spent 9 years hoping we'd fail, I said. That isn't how family works. Or it shouldn't be. Nobody spoke. The leather folder sat on the white linen, unsigned between us. Then Marcus stood, slowly, without hurry. The room went still again in that particular way it had gone still every time he'd spoken tonight. Mrs. Weston. His voice was level, unhurried. I've never needed your approval. I stopped expecting it years ago. Patricia couldn't quite meet his eye. And I've never wished you harm. Isabel loves you, even when you've made it remarkably difficult. That says rather more about her than it does about the rest of this. He paused. So I want to be clear about something. He stepped forward slightly. I won't sell our land, that's settled. But I'm willing to help you keep your house. My mother's head snapped up. Whatever she'd been bracing for, it wasn't that. A personal loan. Enough to cover the immediate mortgage obligation and give you the time to restructure everything else. Not 2.5 million, but enough. Hope crossed my mother's face, desperate, unguarded, the first honest expression I'd seen from her all evening. There are conditions, Marcus said. Richard, who had retreated toward the wall, went rigid. Richard repays every penny, with interest, over 5 years. Documented, legally binding, non-negotiable. Marcus's gaze moved to him. He also seeks professional support for what is clearly a compulsive gambling problem and provides verified evidence of attendance. And we are never asked for money again, I added, by anyone in this family, ever. Richard moved away from the wall, I'm not taking a handout from the man. He stopped himself short. But everyone heard what he didn't say, the man I tried to destroy. This isn't revenge, Marcus said quietly. This is a boundary. The distinction matters. I'd learn it if I were you. Georgina grabbed Richard's arm. Richard, please, just... He shook her off, snatched his jacket from the back of his chair, and walked toward the exit without looking at anyone. This isn't over, he said to the room in general. Nobody moved to stop him. Nobody said a word. Right, I need to pause here, because that moment when Marcus laid out those conditions, I watched my mother's face do something I hadn't expected. Something shifted behind her eyes. For the first time in 9 years, I think she actually understood what she'd been looking at all along. We weren't the ones who'd needed them. We had never been the ones who needed them. What do you think happened next? Did she accept? Did Richard come back? Drop your prediction in the comments before I carry on. And if this story is landing with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. The door swung shut behind Richard. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then Georgina rose from her chair and walked after him, her heels sharp against the flagstone floor, her face crumpling as she went. The atmosphere in the room dissolved all at once, the way held breath releases. Guests began reaching for their coats and their bags with the coordinated determination of people who sense that the polite window for departure has arrived and intend to use it. Lovely evening, Patricia. So sorry about, well, you know, let's catch up soon. The social choreography of retreat. Well practiced. Bloodless. Within 15 minutes, the room that had held 40 people held only us. My mother, my father, Gran Francis, Marcus, and me. And the broken glass still catching the light on the floor. My mother lowered herself into a chair. She seemed smaller than she had an hour ago. The careful architecture of the evening had come apart, and without it she looked like what she was. A 65-year-old woman who had spent decades building an image, and was now sitting in its wreckage at her own birthday dinner. My father moved first. Gerald Weston set his whiskey glass on the table, put his hands in his jacket pockets, and looked at me with the expression of a man who has been storing something up for a very long time. I'm sorry, Isabel. His voice was rough and unpolished, and completely unlike any version of his voice I could remember. I should have said something years ago. When your mother first started, when the engagement party, he struggled for the right words and found only honest ones. I was a coward. I let her speak for the pair of us when I had no business letting her. I let you be pushed away, and I'm sorry. I'm genuinely sorry. The apology hung in the candlelight between us. It's rather late, Dad. I know. His voice broke, just slightly, at the edge. I know that. I'm saying it anyway, for whatever it's worth to you. Something in my chest shifted. Not forgiveness, not quite yet, but the suggestion of it. The shape of where forgiveness might eventually grow, if given enough time and enough consistent trying. Gran Francis rose from her corner table and crossed the room to embrace me. Her arms were narrow and surprisingly strong, and she smelled of her particular perfume, lily of the valley, the same since I was small. I am so proud of you, she said quietly against my hair. Your grandfather would have been too. He would have loved Marcus. I held her tight and didn't trust myself to speak. Behind me, my mother remained in her chair, staring at the unsigned document on the table in front of her. She'd said nothing since everyone left. I wondered if she would. I wondered if she'd find the words, or whether the silence would simply become the new normal between us. A week later, the pieces began to fall into place. Georgina called first. Not to apologize, that would come later, haltingly and in stages, but to tell me that she and Richard were separating. She'd found credit card statements he'd kept from her, debts she'd never known existed, a financial picture that bore no resemblance to what he'd shown her for 7 years. I don't know who I married, she said. her voice stripped of everything. I thought I did. I thought I knew exactly who he was. I said nothing to that. There was nothing useful to say, and no satisfaction in any of it. Just the particular sadness of watching someone discover the true shape of their own life. My mother sold the Harrogate house. Not because Ethan's. Marcus's loan offer was withdrawn. It hadn't been. The conditions still stood, but she couldn't face the neighbours. Word had moved quickly, the way word always moves in a place where reputation matters. By the Monday after the party, her phone had largely gone quiet. She moved to a smaller flat in York, clean, practical, utterly stripped of the particular performance she'd maintained for 4 decades. She didn't ring me. No confrontation, no apology, no acknowledgement of what had happened, just silence, not hostile, just absent. But my father rang every Sunday, short calls at first, cautious and slightly stilted. How are the children? How are things on the farm? Are you getting reasonable weather up there? But he kept ringing, week after week, and somewhere in the 5th or 6th week, the calls stopped feeling obligatory and started feeling like something else. The first time in 9 years my father had simply wanted to hear my voice. Gran Frances didn't just ring. She bought a train ticket from her home in Skipton. She'd never moved far, and appeared on our porch one cold Tuesday afternoon with a wheelie suitcase in one hand and a tin of shortbread in the other. "I'm staying for 3 weeks," she announced. "I want to know my great-grandchildren properly, and I want to see this farm of yours. I've been waiting long enough." Freya and Sam adored her from the first afternoon. She taught them card games with names they found hilarious, told them about the farm their great-great-grandparents had kept in Cumbria, let them help her in the kitchen with results that were cheerfully disastrous. I stood in the kitchen doorway one afternoon, watching Sam try to crack an egg. Shell fragments scattered across the worktop, Gran Frances laughing freely at his expression of outraged concentration, and felt something I hadn't anticipated. Not triumph, not vindication. Relief, a quiet, bone-deep relief. There is a difference between those things, and it matters. I was sitting on the stone step of the farmhouse porch, one late September evening, the air carrying that particular dale's sharpness that settles in when autumn first arrives properly. In the lower field, Marcus was moving between the raised beds with Freya beside him, showing her how to press her fingers into the soil to test its moisture. I could hear them from where I sat. Her voice asking something, his voice answering, her laughter at whatever he said. It carried across the land like something essential. 9 years ago, I'd been terrified. Not of leaving the city, not of starting over, not of the mortgage on a draughty farmhouse in the middle of nowhere. I'd been terrified of losing my family, of lying awake in the dark and wondering whether they were right, whether I was dismantling something I couldn't rebuild, whether one day I'd look back at the choice I'd made and see only the things I'd given up. I'd spent so much time waiting for them to see me properly. Not the Durham graduate, not the junior analyst from the city, not the daughter who was supposed to make my mother's social life shine. Just me, Isabel, with soil under her nails, and a man who grew food and somehow made everything feel worth it. But I'd spent 9 years waiting for people who were looking in entirely the wrong direction. All right. Marcus appeared at the porch step beside me, Sam on his shoulders, Freya trailing with both hands full of wildflowers she'd been collecting from the margins of the field. More than all right, actually. He sat down beside me, settling Sam between us. Freya climbed onto my lap and presented her flowers with the gravity of someone making a significant gift. "For you, Mum. I picked the best ones. They're perfect, love." I pulled her in close and kissed the top of her head. Marcus caught my eye across her. "You're thinking about them." "A bit," I said. "Less, though. Getting there." He nodded. He always understood, without needing everything explained. We watched the last of the light settle across the upper field, the sky going that particular shade of amber and violet that you only really get in the north on an evening like this, and I thought about what the past 9 years had actually contained, not what I'd lost. What I'd built, boundaries are not punishments. I'd spent a long time not quite believing that, and now I did. They are protection. For yourself, for the people who actually matter, for the life you've put your hands and your heart into building. I couldn't make my mother love me the way I needed to be loved. Couldn't make Georgina see past her own fear and insecurity. Couldn't fix something that had been fractured long before Marcus ever appeared with his heritage tomatoes and his muddy boots at a farmer's market in the Dales. But I could choose. I had always been able to choose. And I had. I'd chosen Marcus, this land, these children, this life that had turned out to be so much larger than the one I'd planned. That was enough. That was genuinely more than enough. 6 weeks later, Gran Francis came back down for Freya's 7th birthday. We held it on the farm. A picnic table covered in a cloth printed with sunflowers, a lopsided homemade cake decorated by Sam with considerable enthusiasm and limited precision, and enough laughter to fill something much larger than our farmhouse. After the candles were blown and the children had chased each other out into the field, in the September dusk, Frances and I sat together on the porch swing with our tea. "I have something for you," she said. From her cardigan pocket she drew a small velvet box, worn at the corners. Inside was a ring, antique gold, set with a small sapphire, simple and quietly beautiful. "This belonged to your great-grandmother," she said, "and her mother before that. I've been keeping it for the right moment for a very long time. Grandma, you should keep it. It's not for me," she smiled. "It's for Freya, when she's old enough to understand what it means. I want her to have something from the women who came before her, the ones who chose their own paths when it wasn't easy or fashionable to do so." I took the box carefully, feeling the weight of it in my palm. Not heavy, exactly, but substantial. "Your mother may never quite understand," Frances said quietly. "She's too absorbed in the performance of things to see what's underneath them. But I understand. I've always understood." She patted my hand with hers, dry and warm and utterly certain. "I'm glad, Isabel. I'm so glad that you chose happiness over approval. Some people never manage it. You made it look easy, and it wasn't." I leaned into her, this small, fierce, unwavering woman who had been my anchor when everything else drifted, and stayed there for a long moment. "Just keep being yourself," she said. "The ones who matter will always find their way back to you. The rest, you let them go with as much grace as you can manage." We sat there together in comfortable silence, watching the fireflies begin to appear over the lower meadow, and the sky deepen into full dark above the Dales. Freya and Sam were 2 small shapes in the field below, chasing light. My mother hadn't rung. Georgina was still working through what her marriage had actually been. But my father had sent Freya a birthday card that had arrived that morning, a proper one, handwritten in his slightly cramped script, with a note tucked inside. "I'm sorry I missed so many years. I don't intend to miss more." There was a cheque in it too, and though the money didn't matter, the note mattered enormously. It wasn't a clean ending. It wasn't the reconciliation scene I'd perhaps imagined when I was younger, when I still believed that if you were patient enough and fair enough, everything eventually resolved into something neat. Real things don't resolve like that. They shift and settle and leave marks. They require patience not just once but continuously, and sometimes the people you hoped for most are the ones who arrive last, or arrive imperfectly, or don't arrive at all. But real, I had learned, was worth infinitely more than perfect. Always had been. I just needed 9 years and a birthday dinner to know it all the way down. Thank you so much for staying with me to the end of this story. If any part of it sat with you, If you've ever found yourself choosing between your own peace and someone else's expectations, between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Drop your story below. For more stories like this one, check the link in the description. Until next time, please take care of yourself. And remember, you are always, always allowed to draw a line, even with family, especially with family. This has been Serene Drama Stories.